Hey, we're back. I'm your host, BKP, and we're at Circuit World here in Blue Ridge. Beautiful, cool October morning. What was the temperature? I heard you say?
It was 39.40 on my porch when I got up this morning.
39.40, that's right.
It is fireplace weather.
You know, you have to always say something to get me, but it's time. We say fireplace weather. It's time to go turn it on. We used to build it.
I know, I build it.
Yeah, but I mean, we used to say it's time to build a fire.
No, I still got that old. I still live in the old cabin. It's built in 1950, and it's the whole inside of the place smells like the Old Faithful Lodge where's Old Faithful? Yeah, Yellowstone. The Old Faithful Lodge at Yellowstone, built out of those big old logs, and people used to smoke their pipe and cigars in there. That's where my house smells, like pipe, cigars, and fireplace. Anyway.
Anyhow, it is time for Ask the Doc with Dr. William Whaley. We want to thank Georgia Cancer Research Center, affiliated with Northside Hospital, for this segment. Dr. Whaley, how are you doing?
I'm doing great.
You have an opener, or you have
No. What I'm going to do is I'm really going to hit something important at the end, and I don't want to run out of time.
Okay.
And I do want to point out that one of these questions we got today is a follow-up on the topic we had 2 weeks ago, and I get a lot of talk about it. And I think actually two questions are going to lead into one another. So let's go.
We do have a follow-up from a couple weeks ago that Dr. Whaley was talking about.
Some of these words here. So get your vocabulary.
Here we go. I was told to use turmeric because I suffered from fiber. Wait a minute. I said it 3 times. All right. Fibrocystic disease of the breast. It really seemed to help. I just had someone send me something claiming turmeric use could be tied to some cause of cancers, and I wondered if that is true, if it is risky to take it as a supplement.
Well, this is about the 5th time in 2 years that we've had the turmeric question.
Yes, and it's popular.
Yeah, well, things like that are popular because the supplement industry makes a ton of money, and the advertising and the social media and the hype outweighs the science. Okay, now first of all, the question says fibrocystic breast disease. If you go out and you take about 100 women that are 40 or 45 years old or older, and you examine their breasts, probably of that 100, 75 or 80 are going to have fibrocystic breasts. It's a natural phenomenon as the young adolescent breast, young adult breast under hormone stimulation begins to age, that various places become cystic or become somewhat scarred, and they don't look the same when they're 50 as they looked when they were 18. I'm sure you probably remember that. You remember that? Okay. Well, some of that lumpy bumpiness is called or they are called under the mammogram. The radiologist will say they have cysts or fibrosis, or they'll same mammogram read by 4 people will say normal adult breast for 45-year-old women. Another one will say prominent fibrocystic change, no malignancy seen. Another one will, same mammogram now. You got 3 different radiologists, and one will say moderate fibrocystic breast disease, no evidence of malignancy. And so one guy just said it's a normal 40-year-old breast, and the third guy said it has fibrocystic breast disease. So you don't panic when you hear fibrocystic on a mammogram. That's number 1. Number 2. The reports about turmeric doing anything with fibrocystic disease are all almost like Facebook posts. They're anecdotal. They usually are one person or a group of 3, not a huge clinical trial. We sometimes talk here about these studies that come from Sweden or somewhere, and I'll say there were 240,000 people in this trial. Right. We're talking about a group of 3 or a group of 2 or 1 that had fibrocystic change in their breast, and one took turmeric and it got better, and another took turmeric and it got worse. Well, the truth of the matter is those reports are about exactly the same. So there's as many of these where somebody said, I took turmeric, or my sister and two of the girls on our tennis team took turmeric and we got better. And over here, this guy says everybody in my bridge club that had fibrocystic disease that took turmeric got worse. Okay, so there's no evidence that turmeric has a thing to do with fibrocystic disease getting better or worse. Which brings us back to the idea of what causes cancer. Does benign breast disease like fibrocystic breast disease become malignant? The answer to the question is no. Puts us back on to the turmeric again. And the reason that there's so much hype about turmeric and cancer prevention, if you go back to 2007, there was a U.S. study. It actually was a clinical trial. There were hundreds of people in it, not tens of thousands. And so to do something like this, you really need tens of thousands. But in those hundreds of people, there was a reduction in the number of breast cancers in the females that took it of a small number, let's say 15% or something. Remember a week ago or 2 weeks ago, they had just published an article that said that aspirin lowered the incidence of ovarian cancer by 21%. Well, that's a real number. The turmeric number was less than that, but at least that article said that it helped prevent breast cancer. Now, 1 year later, 2008, there was another trial, 25 patients, you're still not 10,000. 2 of those 25 who had breast cancer getting the same, all of them getting the same treatment. 2 of the 25 that got turmeric, their tumors got smaller under hormonal therapy a little bit faster. So that doesn't have any statistical validity, but there's both sort of, the guy that makes the turmeric's going to put it on the ad, turmeric shrinks breast cancer, or turmeric prevents breast cancer, when you're talking about little bitty tiny numbers. Now, there was a study in England that was reported in 2013 that chemotherapy plus turmeric had, again, a small statistical improvement in patients with colorectal cancer taking chemotherapy. So now you're getting somebody with cancer taking the appropriate chemical treatment, and you add turmeric versus a placebo, and it had, again, a very thin statistical advantage. So once again, the people that make the turmeric stuff would be saying turmeric helps cancer and chemotherapy. Flip side is that during that same period of time, much of the turmeric that was bought by FDA here, or the same thing in Europe, and then came analyzed, had all manner of poisons in them. You remember if they're talking about vape here a week ago? Yeah, it's supposed to be nicotine in there. What did it have? It had synthetic fentanyl and marijuana, and guys fell out and had to go to the ER. So you don't know when you go to get the turmeric in a health food store somewhere that you're not getting something from China that's got a bunch of grinded up junk in it. Flip to the fact that turmeric is a huge dietary component of the Indian subcontinent diet, right? I mean, that's what they put in, what do they put it in? Curry. Yeah, there you go. Makes it yellow, right? So that's why we got these young medical students over here. So what that does is, in those populations where it's, they get it out of the garden and grind it up, and they know it didn't come from China and hadn't got anything in it, they put it in their food, there's a lower incidence of some certain cancers. Well, those people aren't going to get in any trouble eating turmeric. They got out of their garden, ground up, and put it in their curry. But if you take too much turmeric that you've purchased in a health food store, there is a sort of an overdose. Now, I don't know if you've ever seen anybody back in the day when they were touting beta carotene as a cancer prevention, or people who ate carrots in sufficient quantity because of the beta carotene argument, that actually had orange skin. Have you seen one in medical school yet who had the orange skin? Huh? Okay, well, that's, if you take too much turmeric, you can turn yellow. Just like the people who ate tons of carrots and took beta carotene would turn orange. That obviously is too much turmeric. So I hope we're now laying the turmeric to rest. Turmeric is placed, if you make curry and you put it in your food, if your turmeric is actually the turmeric and not something you're buying on a website someplace that you don't know where it was made, it isn't going to hurt you. It does have, as we have said before, some anti-inflammatory properties, and some people say their joints don't feel quite so bad. But it is not known to be a causer of cancer, to answer this patient's question, and it has no beneficial effect on fibrocystic disease that can be supported by any type of literature. Is that enough about turmeric? And you think we probably got it solved?
I think we have. I think we have a good. I think we have a good segment on that. And not to discourage, obviously, anyone that has a question, but I think the next time the question comes through from one of our audience members that has turmeric in it, we can send them this segment immediately and address it, and that way they'll know. So I appreciate that.
By the way, all these segments are available if somebody wants them. It's
everyone.
You got to be a lot more technical than me to be able to find them. Never mind. I can't get my year-end Vanguard report from my daggum accountant. They said, well, yeah, you can get it online. I said, yeah, you can get it online if you remember what password you used for crying in the night.
Okay.
I mean,
I'm with you on that.
Awful, yeah.
I'm with you on that.
I think this next question is kind of important. So
we want to thank Georgia Cancer Research Center, affiliated with Northside Hospital, for this Ask the Doc segment. Our next question, as Dr. Whaley said earlier, our next question is a follow-up to one that a viewer sent a couple weeks ago, and I've recently started treatment for breast cancer. What can I do to reduce my risk of bone fractures?
All right, the first thing I want to have Josh do is just put up that picture of the thoracic spine there. And I don't know how well that's going to project, but it's a pretty good picture. And so if you go out to the screen and you look real carefully, you're going to see two little black arrows there up against these vertebral bodies. And if you just look at those vertebral bodies and you think about canned salmon, what's in canned salmon? You remember those little round bones that used to be in canned salmon when we were kids? It's not in there anymore. I don't know what they did to get it out, but anyway, that little round
that's kind of funny.
That little round bone was the spine of the salmon. Okay, that's a spine right there of a patient, and the two of the vertebral bodies that those arrows point to have been squashed down. So if you look at the vertebral body above it and below it, they have this much height, and one in the middle has that much height. You can pull that off, Josh, and just leave nothing up there for a minute. So that's the type of compression fracture that occurs in normal aging people, primarily women worse than men, from osteoporosis. Now, it put me, as I was thinking about this, a few months ago, I gave I talked here about what's called the female triad. I've always said exercise, calcium is great to prevent osteoporosis, but as you remember, I'm a marathoner and did it for 45 years, and I have treated world-class female athletes. Now, world-class meaning the first female winner of the Boston Marathon. I mean, not your average jogger, who had very early osteoporosis. And so we'll go over here and we'll let the medical student think about this a minute. But if you're a world-class athlete, and remember my granddaughter is the gymnastics champion of New York, and she's 14, these girls have a very low percentage body fat, and they do not have menstrual cycles. They suppress their menstrual cycles by this low body fat and high muscle mass, such that they do not have estrogen in an appropriate amount. And then if they get into their late 20s and early 30s and they haven't had menstrual cycles since they had one or two at 12 or 13, they get early osteoporosis from being very active physically. And that's what's called the female triad. After you throw that out as being the cause of osteoporosis, then it becomes the female hormone the appropriate amount of calcium in the diet, and exercise. Now, show that big old long chart that nobody's going to be able to look at because it's too big, and BKP, I'll show you what he's putting up now. But this here would gag you, and my medical student over there will give this to him and tell him he has to memorize it. But if you look at the causes of osteoporosis, it's 2 pages of single space type stuff, up from drugs to, I mean, this scared you to death, wouldn't it?
Yes, absolutely.
All right, well, they're going to give this to our medical student when we get finished. We're going to ask him to commit that to memory. So, the most common ones are lack of female hormones, or to go through menopause early, not enough exercise, low in calcium or vitamin D. If you x-ray the forearm of a tennis playing woman in her 50s, that arm is going to be denser than the arm that she doesn't use for play tennis. And that's not even a weight-bearing bone. So a woman entering breast cancer treatment, we would tell her, get a bone density study. Medicare is not going to pay for it till she's 50, insurance is not going to pay for it till she's 50 or 60 or whatever they say. But a bone density study at the outset's important. Second, assuming that they're not taking an aromatase inhibitor type hormone, we're going to come to drugs in just a minute, then the prevention of the bone density loss, absent the use of a drug, is exercise, appropriate amounts of calcium, and you can't take hormones, right, because you got breast cancer. So now the women will say, well, what kind of exercise should I do? And I use this example, and I think it's a really good one. The best exercise, if you think about it, is that woman in the Caribbean or in Africa who has a basket on top of her head and a water bottle on top of the basket, who walks around with that thing on her head, because that water bottle is putting stress straight through the skeleton, and that's the parts of the skeleton that would break, correct? That'll be the neck, the spine, the hips, the legs. And so I say, well, you can't walk around with that basket on your head because you can't balance it. But you can certainly walk with a can of pork and beans in each hand. And if that can of pork and beans weighs a mile, and you walk a mile, and you do that with each step, if that's roughly 1,500 meters, and that means you've done this 3,000 times in 1,500 meters, and if that can of pork and beans or the 1 pound hand weight weighs a pound, and since your shoulders are attached way up here, you've actually lifted 1 ton of weight that has been transmitted through that portion of the body that's vulnerable to fracture. That first picture was the thoracic spine. Well, your shoulders are attached way up here, so that thoracic spine has lifted 1 ton in walking a mile with a can of pork and beans in each hand. So this is the tortoise and the hare. Slow, steady. All right, so 1, it's exercise. 2, it's calcium. Now you're going to, that next one, you got that one about calcium. That's going to be kind of big. All right, so we've done this several times before, but if you look real carefully, the amount of dietary calcium that's recommended varies over the lifetime. Here are kids 4 and 8 years old that says the recommended amount's 1,000, 1,300, 1,000, and then you get older and the amount goes down. But by the time you get old like us, it's up to 1,200. Americans don't get that much calcium anymore. Why? Because they tell us milk raises your cholesterol level, or it's expensive. We don't eat much in the way of cheese. So the vitamin D and the calcium recommendations for normal people and for those on cancer therapy have to be carefully adhered to. Now, lastly, they ask, what can I do to protect my bone density? We want to go to the TV and Sally Fields. Years ago, little Sally Fields was given ads for this pill, Fosamax or Boniva or whatever it was, and that drug...
Yeah, I actually remember that.
Yeah, little Sally Fields. But anyway, those drugs have been converted, I think I said something about it a few weeks ago, to drugs that are given either subcutaneous, given as a shot this way or as an IV, in cancer patients in higher dose to stabilize the bone, and by stabilizing the bone they diminish the favorable environment in the bone for the growth of cancer cells. And those drugs are Prolia and Boniva, and there's a dozen of them. So our patient with breast cancer, first, the doctor ought to be talking to you. Second, you probably have not had, or maybe you have had, a bone density. You need to know where you're starting out. You need to make sure you're getting the proper amount of calcium and vitamin D. You need to make sure that you're exercising. And then, if you're taking drugs in this hormonal category that's aromatase inhibitors, you need to be on one of those drugs. If you're not, you're taking chemotherapy, you don't need those drugs, but you need to continue the exercise, continue the calcium, and continue the vitamin D. And I guess that's enough of that.
That's enough of that. That's enough of that.
Okay, now what's the biggest thing in medical news today?
I don't know. I have to be straight. It's been a different...
All right,
let's ask him. Let's ask the guy over here.
We're going to ask our medical student.
This is a test. You said students.
I said in medical news today. So it isn't, nicotine, tobacco causes lung cancer, or cholesterol causes, it is acute flaccid myelitis.
Okay.
The polio-like illness.
Yes, 22 states. Is it 22 states?
22 states.
That it's been, yes.
22 states.
Here, thank you so much for bringing that
up.
Yes.
Yesterday's bulletin. Who put this out here? What's
CDC.
Oh my God! Another one of those.
Yes, but I was watching that.
Left wing.
You know what? Let me say this, folks. That is what I love about this segment here. I can always guarantee you, without knowing what is going to happen in this segment, Dr. Whaley is looking at these things, and he's going to bring this kind of information. I was looking at the news this week, and as I'm rushing through, and there is this polio-like is at 22 states that children, and go right ahead. But I am so glad you're doing this.
You heard about Zika here,
right?
1 year before it ever hit the newspaper. Okay, I have a particular interest in this because of my age. I lived through the polio epidemic of the early 1950s. They closed the River School in Atlanta, closed the school. They closed Chastain, Garden Hill swimming pools. They closed the swimming pools. The churches closed all, it didn't close adult services, but it closed all services for kids. And that went on for about 5 or 6 months during the polio epidemic, because the deal was they didn't know what caused polio really in that days. That's 1952, if I remember correctly. We had kids in my neighborhood that died, boy crossed the street on an iron lung, and this is serious as a train wreck. It isn't new, okay? Everybody that looks at this is of the idea that this is a brand new thing and hasn't happened before. This has gone on in 2014, 2016, 2018. It sounds like it's an every other year phenomenon, although it's been there every year. But this year is bigger because there have been 127 cases so far this year. That means it's probably going to be 300 or 400 once they get them all categorized. In 2014, I think it was a total of about 120. 2016, about 140. So this is going to be more. In 2014, they were able to isolate that one of these arbor viruses, polio-like viruses that wasn't polio, that just causes a common cold, sort of sniffles and a cough in people, can be the cause of those. They did not hypothesize any specific group of those viruses in 14 or 16. And this year, they have put an entire epidemiological team from the CDC on it, like they did on polio. Steve Marlowe, who we've mentioned here before, his partner, and Steve's got a house up here. His partner's brother ran the epidemiology section at Emory, at the CDC, across the street from Emory, that figured out what Legionnaire's disease was. And And this is just detective work. This is not laboratory work. And so these guys in epidemiology are out there today going around to every one of these cases and trying to figure out what is it that binds this case in Georgia to this case in Washington State in some kind of way. You know, they all eat a hamburger at so-and-so, and they'll hopefully find some common epidemiological thing, while then the lab guys, all these little guys with the microscopes, have got blood from these people and blood from their family members and blood from their classmates out there at the CDC that they're looking for antibodies to every blinking virus we've ever heard of, and perhaps they'll come up with something. But what I wanted to do, the reason I wanted to bring this up today, because that's all interesting. The epidemiology is interesting, and what they're doing in the virology labs is interesting. But here is the precaution. What this tells the CDC is we need to pay attention to this, because the long-term consequences is immense, and many of these patients never recover and they die. So what they're telling parents is that if you have a child that has an acute viral illness and then suddenly acts like their muscles are weak, they need to be in the hands of a pediatrician or in an emergency room immediately, because they can go from early sickness to paralyzed breathing in a matter of hours, just like Guillain-Barré syndrome. So don't go out there and panic if your kid comes home from school today and sniffles and blows his nose. But if he's sitting in a chair at supper and he can't stand, or if he has his his glass of milk and he drops it because he has become weak enough not to do an activity of daily living like holding a coffee cup, or maybe if you make him cut the grass or something, or one of the great tests of proximal muscle strength is just, can you get up out of a chair without using your hands? And if they can't do that, they go to the emergency room. Is that them telling us we're overrun our time here?
No, it's probably not.
It's probably somebody wants to go back to a fan and football game tonight, or what?
Yeah, it's probably not. Actually, I have it's concerning something we were talking about earlier. Okay.
What else? That's it. That's all. No jokes. Dr. Tidman's not here today. Now he's working with Tidman, so he gets a ration of jokes every day.
Okay, so
he's going to be with Tidman for 6 weeks.
So then what we'll have to do?
He's going to be one of the great jokesters.
All right. Well, then his 6 week when he finishes, he has to come tell Ray Tidman jokes.
Yeah,
there you go. That's the deal.
We'll have him in here
last week. He has to come and tell Doc. And we're going to say,
we'll bring Ray down. We'll do three.
We'll do three. We'll say
do a panel.
We'll say, okay, now what we need to do is what you've learned in the last 6 weeks working with Dr. Tidman. Yeah. And he says, and then his line is, okay, here's what I learned. Okay, 3 guys were on a golf course. What? Yeah, exactly.
Top 10 jokes.
So anyhow, thank you, Dr. Whaley. We appreciate you very much, and we also want to say thank you to Georgia Cancer Research Center, affiliated with Northside Hospital, for this segment. And if you have a question for Dr. Whaley, you send that to info at Fetch Your News, and put in the subject line, Ask the Doc. We'll get that to Dr. Whaley. And yes, follow us on Facebook, Fetch Your News Facebook page, or FYN TV Facebook page, and you can send us questions there, because we've gotten several of your questions off our Facebook page. So follow us on Facebook or send them by email to Ask the Doc. We'll get them to you. And if you want to share these segments with your friend, they're on our YouTube channel, FYN TV Fetch Your News. Hit playlist. There they are on Ask the Doc. Thank you very much.
Something just popped into my mind. A man is known by the company he keeps.
Okay.
And I saw last night a little blurb on Stacey Abrams with Maxine Waters. Wait a minute.
I'm
Eric Holder.
I'm sorry.
I am brought to Georgia, and that's Eric Holder's comment about when they're down, we kick them, was at a Stacey Abrams meeting. Did you know that? I don't know if you made it real carefully. And Maxine Waters was spouting at a Stacey Abrams meeting. And I'm not here to do politics, but I was embarrassed for Georgia.
The company you keep. I couldn't agree more. Thank you, Dr. Whaley. Thank you, Georgia Cancer Research Center, affiliated with Northside Hospital. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to have a candidate that's on the ballot here in Fannin County for the Fannin County School Board. So we're going to have a candidate with us a couple minutes and introduce you to him, and then it will be time for the all-star panel. Thank you, Dr. Whaley. Take us a break.